Today, we're looking at the Houston Rockets, their 2019-2020 NBA season, the upheaval so far in the offseason, what's happening in the future. This team could be a mess in a few years' time, Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today we're going to be looking at the Houston Rockets. Quick news though that did just come down. Ty Lue has been hired by the LA Clippers to be their head coach. I don't have really too many thoughts on what that means for this team fantasy-wise for the Clippers. We'll talk about more about that when we get to the Clippers, probably next week or the week after. More about their value is going to be what happens in free agency, what happens with Montrezl Harrell specifically. Rather than the coach, Lue was not... He was a really consistent coach with the Cavs in terms of rotations. They were the most boring fantasy team in the world when he was coaching. It was LeBron and Love and Kyrie, and then actually nobody else. And they were just consistent night to night, which I guess is a good thing from a fantasy point of view. But I think we're going to have a similar sort of scenario. But the team and the build, the makeup of the team is quite different, and we're not going to know what sort of impact he has until we see what happens in free agency. The Rockets, they don't have any head coach at this point. Daryl Morey, a couple of hours ago, he stepped down. That was as much as you could see writing on the wall for something happening as it was going to happen. That's it. Morey was always gone. I thought maybe he'd wait until his contract was over. He said, I'm done with this shit. I'm done with whatever's going on with Tillman Fertitta, because that bloke is one of the worst owners in the NBA. And Morey is out. So not only is there no Daryl Morey, of course there's no Mike D'Antoni. So at this point, we just have no idea what the hell this team's going to be. They went all in on small ball. That's a Morey philosophy plus a D'Antoni philosophy. So what do they do now? With no centers around, do they change things around? They've got no draft picks in the future because of the Russell Westbrook trade. They're going to be shit at some point. Westbrook's already not good. Their team is not deep at all. Morey was always able to find the guys, the Austin Riverses, the Jeff Greens, the guys to come in and help fill in those gaps. And those guys, Morey's not there anymore. The reports about the coach is it looks like maybe it's Jeff Van Gundy. Now, hiring Jeff Van Gundy would at least show that Fertitta is not completely a tight ass, because Van Gundy's not going to be a league minimum coach. But the other reports are they're going to hire John Lucas, who would be a minimum level coach. And then as for the front office, who knows? Nobody has the record or the propensity, I guess, to swing deals and to go risky like Morey. So that's going to change things up quite a bit. As for Van Gundy, he hasn't coached since 2007. Now, his record is pretty good. 58% career winning percentage. He was over 500 every year in his career except for the second last one. He made one NBA Finals. He made the playoffs in all his 7 seasons bar 2. All of his 11 seasons bar 2. So 9 out of the 11 seasons. He made it, but this is 13 years ago. Listening to him talk on a broadcast, I know he's been coaching the USA team, but it doesn't inspire me with confidence that he's going to be a great option as a head coach. I am way more into getting these younger guys, these assistant coaches, giving them opportunities. We've seen it have success with Nick Nurse, for example, Mike Budenholzer, Taylor Jenkins. There's so many of these guys who come up through the ranks who can be successful as head coaches. The Ty Lue one, he was an assistant with the Clippers. I'm sort of with him, but hiring a Jeff Van Gundy, or as the Pelicans are looking for a Stan Van Gundy, I'm more into Stan than Jeff at this point, to be honest, because he's at least more connected to the modern game than what Jeff is. I feel a little weird about it. The John Lucas thing would be absolutely disastrous. I think I'd rather them go with a Sam Cassell or Ime Udoka or one of those guys. Interesting that Chauncey Billups got the assistant coaching job with the Clippers. At least they didn't put him straight into a head coaching job with no experience. His name has been floated around for every head coaching job and every general manager opening. Just pick a lane, Chauncey. Like, what do you want to do? And maybe get some experience in doing it before your name is thrown out everywhere. But now he is doing that, getting that experience, and then I think that'll serve him well. I know I'm all tangenty here, but these are the things that we just don't know with this Rockets team. Who's going to coach them and who's going to be in charge in the front office? Let's have a look at questions that you guys did send through over on the Discord. Remember, if you are a member of my Patreon, there is a link to a new Discord server, and that's where we're going to have the chat going from there. So Kano says, can you see Chris Clemens ever getting meaningful minutes or meaningful playing time with Houston? Chris Clemens is a really high-level scorer. He's just too small. He's 5'9", and that's being generous. He played just the 33 games, 9 minutes a game, averaged 5 points. In the G League, 24 points per game, banged in 12 three-point attempts per game, hit almost 4 of them. That's not a surprise. Didn't do it super efficiently, but we know this is what he's going to do. But I think he's just too small. He's an okay distributor. I'd like to see him get an opportunity at some point. But he's, 23 years of age at this point, so he's not super young. I just think his size is going to hold him back. He's going to score when he gets an opportunity. 5 points in 9 minutes is not a terrible return. This is a guy that you're talking about, 15, 16 point per game player if he was starting, maybe even more. But what else he does outside of that, the defensive issues, rebounding is a struggle. He's not a great assist guy. They're all some holdbacks, I think, for his value. B-Dub says, with D'Antoni gone, what are the chances that Bob Cove is starting center for Houston next season? Well, look, PJ Tucker was the starting center. Covington did play some center on this team. I just don't know. Now, we know that center is probably the most replaceable position around. So there are going to be, do they look to bring Montrezl Harrell back if they want a center? There are lots of options that they can go for with this team. They could start Covington at small forward. They could start Tucker back at the 4. They could get themselves another center. Do they get themselves in the mix for a Miles Turner in Indiana? There are centers going to, do they bring Derek Favors in as a center, who's a free agent from the Pelicans? They could go back to getting a center. I wouldn't say that the small ball situation completely was a disaster. I think it was pretty successful for most of the season. The problem you had was the Lakers were really good, and the Lakers beat them in 5 in the playoffs. They got one game off them. They beat the Lakers in the regular season. This is not a scenario where this lineup can't work or can't have more success, but without Morey to fill in the gaps around the side and without D'Antoni, it is going to be a little bit tougher. So it's after sacrificing so much to go down this path, trading away Clint Capella to go down this path, will the new GM really come in and say, well, that was all wrong, let me try again? Because I think he's going to be in a significantly larger hole if he decides to do that. And if I was the GM, I'd at least try and play it out small ball for one more year and try and make moves maybe to correct that in a year's time. But doing it half a season after they went all in on that mode, puts you in a bigger hole and makes you look worse and makes the team look worse if you're trying to correct that. And I think that looks bad on your resume as a GM and a coach. I'm not convinced they're going to go, well, let's just go back to traditional centers and play 25 minutes of 50-year-old Tyson Chandler out there, because he, at this point, is the only center on their roster. But there's a lot of upheaval happening with this team, obviously. Let's have a look. Mr. Black, how much longer do you think Jim Harden can sustain top 5 value? Well, Jim Harden was the number 1 ranked player in fantasy last season. He's just turned 31. James Harden has been the number 1 fantasy player, pretty consensus-y to me over the last few years. Well, he's always been the guy that I've been looking to take at number 1 in drafts. And if you take him at number 1 in drafts, one thing you feel confident about, you're not going to go wrong. He was the number 1 player in 19-20, in 18-19, in 17-18, in 16-17. 4 straight number 1 finishes for Harden. The year before that, he was number 3. The year before that, he was number 2. The year before that, he was number 5. He's really bloody good. At some point, he is going to fall off. I reckon there's a chance he's not the number 1 player this year. You would have no problem selecting James Harden at number 1. No problem whatsoever. Because I think that's a fine move, because he might finish 2nd or 3rd. But maybe he's not the number 1 guy. But the question from Mr. Black is, how long can he sustain top 5 value? I reckon, and it's tough at 31, I reckon you're going to give him minimum 2, probably 3 more seasons at that level. It's not easy to do that at age 34. Maybe 3 years is too much. Let's say next year for sure, the year after almost definitely, and then after that maybe he falls down to top 13, top 14. But I think at least 2 more years. Matty Lawson comes in with the Rockets Dynasty ADPs. Jimmy Harden, 5. Now, we're taking Davis, we're taking Luka ahead of him, almost definitely. Well, not almost definitely. Luka is going at 1 in Dynasty Leagues. You've got Davis going ahead of him. Yanni probably goes ahead of him there as well. Who else are we taking ahead of Harden in Dynasty? That's 3 guys. So at pick 5, I'd take Harden. If Harden's around at pick 5, I would take him in Dynasty Leagues. I think that's worthwhile. Russell Westbrook at 42. Westbrook was the 16th ranked player this year. In the bubble games, he was the 70th ranked player in 36 minutes. In the playoffs, he was the 64th ranked player. Will he be the 16th player again this year? I would have pretty significant doubts. Would I take him at 42? I tell you what, I'm not sure that I would. I reckon his fall is going to be hard and it's going to be rapid. If Westbrook finishes outside the top 42 this season, I will not be surprised. Bob Covington at 46. He was the 44th ranked player this year. In the bubble, he was 23rd. In the playoffs, he was 15th. The Rockets system really suited him, but is that Rocket system going to be intact? I think that's an okay position for Covington, but it's not fantastic. Daniel House Jr. and Daniel House Jr., the man and the penis that got himself in trouble in the bubble at 166. House is a player that I don't really rate massively. 133rd ranked player this year, 27th, 27 years of age. Obviously, his teammates aren't real pleased with him and his shenanigans in the bubble. He played 30 minutes a night. I think on a regular team that's not the Rockets, he's not getting 30 minutes a night. He can hit threes. That's fine. He hits threes. He gets steals at an okay rate, and he does literally nothing else. And I don't think that his future in the NBA as a starter is all that long term. Eric Gordon at 220. He was absolute trash. And Gordon is 32 years of age. He only played 28 minutes a night, averaged 14 points. He was not that much better in the playoffs, I wouldn't have thought. In the bubble games. In the playoffs, he played 34 minutes, averaged 17 points. Can he have one season where he's inside the top 220? Yeah, look, really comfortably. Probably 2 seasons, and that's about it. But at 220, I'd probably take that flyer, depending on how else I build my dynasty team. If there's a lot of young blokes there, there's no point wasting him at 220. But if you've got a pretty strong team and you've taken Chris Paul at pick 60 because he fell down and LeBron at pick 18 because he fell down, then yeah, sure, go all in, try and win it and get 100 spots worth of value for one season out of Eric Gordon. PJ Tucker at 234. Again, real old PJ Tucker. He is 35 years of age. He was the 138th ranked player. He is not going to last at that level for more than a year. I think that, again, depends on what you've done beforehand. Well, Benny McLemore at 303. McLemore had a pretty strong season as the 212th ranked player on the back of hitting a lot of threes and doing that relatively efficiently and doing literally nothing else. I don't have any faith that he's going to be able to improve himself from there all that much, and I reckon we can find someone better than him at that area. The next question comes from Irv Dizzle. Do you see Houston picking up Nwaba's contract? Yes, he's got a $1.9 million team option. They didn't sign him not to pick that up. Now, it is a new front office, so we'll see what happens there. But yes, I can see them picking him up. And do I see him being fantasy relevant? Not really. He's a guy that plays really good defense, but overall, he just doesn't have a great fantasy game. Steals and blocks are nice, but the minutes aren't going to be huge. He's not a scorer, he's not a passer, he's not a rebounder, he's not a shooter. So no, I don't really see him being fantasy relevant. Being a rotation player, sure. But coming off an Achilles injury for a guy that wasn't that good to begin with, I don't think the upside is particularly high. So lots of questions coming through from you guys. Let's have a look at, is there any that came through on the old Instagram that's interesting? From Banani Matabo, couldn't imagine any team trading for Westbrook contract at any cost. I agree with that. Covington is a solid player, but I feel like he wouldn't get value in a trade. Yep. Nobody else is tradable on that roster outside of Harden. They are really screwed for the next few years. So the answer to that question is yes. They probably will be okay next year. Their future is rough. It's really rough, I think. Brian Taylor says, at this point, their rebuild is going to be absolutely awful once they get to it. You see them trying to ship out rotation players for picks like Austin Rivers, Eric Gordon, or Daniel House. What the hell are you getting for Austin Rivers? Nothing, most likely. Daniel House, maybe a late first. Eric Gordon and his 32-year-old baggy-ass knees, probably a late first, maybe. Maybe you do it. And then what do? Piss off Russell Westbrook and James Harden and leave your team sort of in flux? I think they just go with it for one more year, at least with Gordon. Those other guys are pretty useless. And you're going to have to deal with some pain. If you're going to make a trade, it's got to be trying to get off Westbrook or trying to get off Harden. And you can't get off Westbrook unless you're attaching assets to it. Unfortunately for Russ, Gabriel Giljanovic, how likely is it that Westbrook's load management continues? I'd say it's pretty likely given the state of his knee and his quad, and he's just banged up. And does he decline this season? Yes, I'm almost convinced, almost certain that his decline is going to continue, and it's going to be pretty rapid. Dream float high. Will Isaiah Hartenstein ever get a chance? Anytime he plays, he kills it. Well, that'd be great, but he's not on a roster. The Rockets waived him, so he's not on this team anymore. I think he will get another chance somewhere, but we just don't know where because he hasn't been signed by anyone at this point. Let's have a look. What's the best coaching option for them? Yeah, again, I think they should be looking at players or coaches like Sam Cassell, David Vanterpool. I'd love to see David Vanterpool get an opportunity. Ime Udoka, Becky Hammond. Any of these highly regarded assistants. Darvin Ham is a name that's been thrown around. Chris Finch, another name who'd been thrown around. Any of those sort of assistants, I'd love to see them get an opportunity. And then let's have a look lastly on the Twitter questions before we get into this, because there's so many people asking questions that it's taking up big chunks of the show, but I think you guys might enjoy me answering your questions and getting a look on the team that way. All right. The Russell Westbrook apologist says, my question is it a fire sale in Houston now? Do you think that includes James Harden? Lastly, in this market, what do you think is a general return for someone like him? I don't think it's a fire sale because look, they have been the most consistently successful team since they got James Harden. Tillman Fertitta is a tight ass. So he is not going to want to sell away his highest earning asset in James Harden, the guy that brings people in, the guy that brings attention to the franchise, the guy that sells merchandise and tickets, and the guy that gets them into the playoffs. So no, I don't think they're getting rid of Harden. Josh Padgett, what is the path to cap space in 2021? They could lure a big free agent, but without making a move at the top. Westbrook, Harden, I don't see where the cash comes from. Look, you just can't. You got to get off Westbrook because his contract is disgusting. It's so bad, and no one's taking it on. And you don't really have the future assets to move on from it. It's going to be really rough. Let's have a look. Is this the start of the decline for Westbrook? Yes, it is. All right. Can Robert Covington sneak into the top 30? That's from Think About It. Well, as I said, in the bubble regular season games, playing 34 minutes a night, he was the 23rd ranked player. That's not including everybody. Top 30 is probably a stretch, and you're obviously getting it on the basis of steals and blocks. That's what his value is. It's those two categories with some threes as well. Pretty strong rebounder, but I reckon you're safer looking at him as a top 40 player rather than a top 30 player, and maybe he falls to the top 60. But the Houston system did fit him really well. But so much is going to depend to me on what happens in free agency, because if he's not playing that center role or rim protecting role as much, then the block numbers will fall, the rebound numbers will fall, and that will push him out of that zone that we saw from him during that time that he was a member of the Houston Rockets. That's the questions that I'm going to answer. That's a lot of them. So let's look at these players now in that more detail. We'll start with Jimmy Harden, as I said, the number one ranked player. He averaged 34, 6.5 and 7.5 with 1.8 steals and 0.9 blocks. And that part of Harden's game goes unrecognized. We know he's a big scorer. He hit 4.5 threes. He gets the line 12 times for 87 attempts, but almost 2 steals and almost a block with 7.5 assists. This is why he's the number one player, because he's putting up big numbers everywhere. And people will often say, oh yeah, but if I take Harden, I've got to punt field goal percentage. That is bullshit, because you don't have to punt field goal percentage. He was at 44%. It's a negative 1.06 in terms of Z-score value. That is the easiest recoverable for negative that you will find. Pair him with a center in round 3. Pair him with Clint Capella. In there, the free throw percentage is a problem. But pair him with LaMarcus Aldridge, perhaps Nikola Vucevic. You can get that number back very, very easily. So no, he is not an auto punt guy. And you know what? Yeah, he gets a lot of turnovers. Don't care. You should not care at all about turnovers. And that is not a reason not to pick him at number 1. It is absolute nonsense. His PIPM absolutely through the roof. 6.61. His Raptor, 10.5. Ridiculous. 63 true shooting. 36 usage. He was unbelievable for this team. You can talk about his playoff failures and the struggles that he has there, and that's fine. But he is still going to be really, really good for the next few years, and a top 5 player, as I said, for at least the next 2 seasons would be my guess. Next up is Westbrook, who, let's be fair to Westbrook, he was a big improver this year. Now, he started off the season like trash. He was bad to begin the year and then started to figure things out. He played 36 minutes a night. He did sit out every back-to-back with his knee. He averaged 27, 8, and 7, so that's a fair way away from the triple-doubles of yesteryear. 1.6 steals, 47 from the field, and amazingly got his free throws back up, which is one of the great mysteries of the NBA, how Westbrook went from an 85% shooter to 74, then down to 66 in his last year with the Thunder, and he got it back up to 75%. But in the playoffs, Westbrook's free throws went down to 53%. In the bubble, they're down to 62%. There is something to say about this bloke's mental state and the way that he hits free throws. And I'm not knocking him at all, but things throw his free throws off massively. When they reduce the ability for him to high-five players at the free throw line, which literally is the dumbest thing that this sport does. Who needs to high-five everyone else? I understand it's part of his routine and walking back, but it screwed him. And he is susceptible to that sort of stuff. And we saw that the bubble environment, he couldn't hit free throws. So I don't really know what to make of overall his free throw numbers, where it's going to be. At this point, you have to expect maybe it's just going to be bad. Same with his field goal percentage, which got up to 47%, but that was into the D'Antoni system where he was functionally playing as a center. And you are only taking shots at the rim, really, and he's not taking threes. Where he cannot hit threes at all anymore. He's not taking huge amounts of them, but he's still taking enough for it to be a problem. And if that scoring and usage drops, the 34% usage, the true shooting of 54%, which is not particularly high, if those numbers drop, then he is going to be in trouble for that value. Look at Harden's PIPM and Raptor versus Westbrook. Negative 0.39 PIPM, negative 1 Raptor. These blokes play together a lot. And Westbrook is that bad when Harden was off the court that those how his numbers look. That is not a great sign for where Russ sits in the future. And I reckon he's not going to be a top 30 player this year and maybe not a top 40 player. I think that field goal percentage will go from 47 to 43. There's a chance the free throws drop again and maybe he plays fewer minutes under a Actually, let's phrase that again. D'Antoni drove the shit out of his players, so the new coach maybe plays him 33 minutes. I'm not touching Westbrook in the first 3 rounds, and outside the top 50 is a distinct possibility in my mind. Bob Covington, the 44th ranked player. Look, he is obviously a really good fantasy player because he gets steals, he gets blocks, he hits threes, he gets rebounds. His time in Houston was different to what he did in Minnesota for one massive reason. He went from 0.9 blocks per game in Minnesota to 2.2 with the Houston Rockets. Everything else, the scoring is similar, the steals similar. He got an extra 2 rebounds, and this is why I worry about what they do. Do they change their philosophy? Because if there is another center there and he's not getting rebounds and he's not protecting the rim, then that value goes from being the 25th ranked player, 30th ranked player, to being a bloke who's maybe 60th or 70th, and that's going to really hurt his value. So it's hard to know where to value him, and if you've got him in a dynasty league, he's about to turn 30. If someone wants to offer you top 40, top 30 value for Covington, I would by all means try and do that, because there is a real worry about where this team sits and what his role's going to be as we move forward. His 8 bubble games, 34 minutes, under 10 points, but 2.4 steals, 1.8 blocks. Really good numbers. In the playoffs, 2.5 steals, 1.1 blocks. Really shot the ball well as well. But there is a lot of inconsistency with what Covington does. Good PIPM, good Raptor, good true shooting, but there is some significant worries about how all this translates in future years. Next up, we fall a long way down outside the top 100 now to Daniel House Jr., 133rd ranked player, 0.2 PIPM, negative 0, positive 0, the same thing. He's a 0 on Raptor, 57 true shooting. He averaged just 30 minutes and 10 points a game. The reason that he was able to be useful in fantasy was 2 threes and 1 steal, but really not much else. Didn't get to the line, even though he hit his free throws well. I just don't value him as this long-term, huge upside sort of a player. The system and the way things were running in Houston enabled him to do what he was able to do, and I don't think if you pushed him into any sort of larger role, he'd be successful at it. I just think that there is a chance that instead of 30 minutes a night, he plays 27 minutes a night, and he's not someone with any level of high upside that I'd be taking in the back end of drafts. I just don't value what House does. I can get those threes somewhere else. I can cycle them in. I can stream them in. And House is a very, very low upside play who's probably going to be on and off waiver wires all season, but honestly not someone that I'd be putting too much stock in. PJ Tucker, 138th ranked player, only 7 points per game. The shooting was rough, 42%. The value that he provides is he got 1 steal per game, and he got you 6 rebounds. Like, nothing spectacular at all. People froth over him and both House because they have low turnovers. Like, I don't give a shit. I can get low turnovers, but not playing anybody. And what they do is so minimal, and it's why 9-cat rankings are absolute nonsense. I could take a whole podcast to explain that, but just when you're looking at ranking, well, PJ Tucker was the 70th ranked player in 9-cat, it's bullshit. You would never take him at that spot. Same with House, whose value jumps significantly because of how little they turn the ball over. And they turn the ball over so little because they don't take shot attempts, they don't pass, they don't have the ball in their hands, they don't do anything constructive. And I feel like I'm shitting on these guys. They're really useful for what the system the Rockets were running, but yeah, that's where their usefulness ends. 35 years of age for PJ Tucker. He played 34 minutes a night. I'd be pretty stunned to expect him to play that much again, and I think his level of play will fall off again somewhat. His numbers in the playoffs and the bubble were comically low. He couldn't get steals. He wasn't hitting threes. He wasn't scoring really at all. And I think that's probably a concern for him as we move forward, and not someone that's probably going to be that standard league type of player for any length of time. And by any length of time, I mean, not happening anymore for him in the future. Let us have a look. Who is the next bloke on my list? We are now looking at Ben McLemore. A surprise to be sure.
A surprise to be sure, but a welcome one.
McLemore, the 212th ranked player. Who knew that he was even going to get rotation minutes necessarily? He started games. He hit some threes, 2.5 a game, and scored 10 points. He does absolutely nothing else. 2 rebounds, under an assist, half a steal, 0.2 blocks, 44 and 75, but he hit 40% from 3, which is solid enough. His PRPM and Raptor were pretty strong. 62 true shooting is massive, and this is a bloke who's never been efficient. So to see that level of shooting from McLemore, and to see him come in ranked higher than Eric Gordon, is just absolutely mind-blowing. McLemore, though, is not someone who we expect to have some sort of breakout. He's got a $2.3 million non-guarantee on his contract. I imagine they pick it up. He's useful enough as a rotation player. And maybe at age 27, 28, he can have another season similar to this as a 3-point streamer, because that's where his value is. And to be honest, if you're streaming him, like, you could stream him over Daniel House and get threes in at a similar level. The difference between those two is steal rate, where House was getting half or double the amount of steals and a few more rebounds. That's what separates those numbers out. Next up is Eric Gordon, 234th ranked player. I was really down on Gordon coming into the season. Yeah, we see that he can put up numbers when he plays by himself or with one of Harden, and he struggled when both Paul and Harden were healthy the year before. So having Westbrook in the mix was just going to make it even tougher. And then he got injured and he struggled. He shot just 37% from the field and only 77% from the line for a true shooting of 51. His impact stats were terrible. Negative 2.5 PIPM and negative 3.6 Raptor. He still had a 23% usage. He averaged 14 points in 28 minutes, but 1.5 assists is disgusting. And part of his value was he can run as a point guard on the second unit, 3-4 assists per game. But with Westbrook there, it was just never going to happen, and it didn't happen. 2 rebounds, 2.6 steals, 37% shooting, 32% from 3, 32 years of age, busted up knees and ankles and injured all over the shop. I have very little faith for Eric Gordon moving forward. I think he'll be better than this, because I think he can shoot better than this. But do I think that he's ever going to sniff the top 100 again? No. I think we're a long way off Eric Gordon being able to do that. But in saying all of that, in the playoffs, he played 34 minutes a night. He was the 45th ranked player in the playoffs. He averaged 17 points with 2.5 threes and still only shot 41%. So it wasn't a big jump. But what he did was his free throws went back up, and that maybe is going to be the key. Is he an 87% free throw guy, or is he a 76% free throw guy? Can he hit threes at all? Can he do anything? Can he get that usage up? The minutes were encouraging. Again, he is 32, so I'm a little bit cautious about how much they play him. Maybe it is only 30 minutes a night. I still am going to be really, really not interested in taking him, though, in standard leagues, really, for next season. Next up, we got Jeff Green.
Go, 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 go. Who's next?
My name is Jeff.
Jeff Green came across, signed At one of those Morey specials, buyout sort of players. He's 34. I thought that Jeff Green was impressive at times, and I didn't think I'd really say that too much about Jeff Green, but we know he's inconsistent, and he's never going to play a large enough role to really be all that impactful. 34 years of age, 20 minutes a night, 9 points, 3 rebounds. True shooting was pretty good at 59%. Negatives in your impact stats. In the bubble, in the seeding games, 26 minutes a night, he was the 69th ranked player.
Giggity!
He averaged 15 points. There's some really strong numbers. In the playoffs, he played 28 minutes and averaged 12 and 5. Like some solid numbers for Jeff Green. How this team shakes out and where he fits in the rotation remains to be seen if he is re-signed, because he is an unrestricted free agent. But he showed a little bit of life for maybe there's a chance that Green can be a top 200 player. And I think there's probably a chance that happens for him next season. Austin Rivers, 277th ranked player. Overall, he has a $2.4 million player option. I don't think teams are going to be clamoring for Austin Rivers. He's a solid enough rotation player. He's a terrible fantasy player. He just needs the ball in his hands in 35 minutes to even crack the top 100, and neither of those things are happening on this team. He hits some threes. He gets some scoring, maybe. He's inefficient. He's not a player that does anything good on a limited basis. Fine as a rotation guy. Maybe he can be a top 250 player, but outside of that, I don't know what else we're looking at with Rivers here. He's 28 years of age as well, so he's not super young. This Rockets team, the back end of their roster's bloody rough, man. 326th ranked player was David Nwaba. We talked about him already, coming off the Achilles injury. He'll be healthy at some point during the season, but he's a guy that get people really excited because of a huge steal rate. Sometimes he hits threes, but he's low usage, low rebound, low assist, low threes. Can block some shots and can get some steals. Can play some good defense. But he's also just about to turn 28. He's coming off an Achilles. He's not someone I'd want to trust. Now, is there a chance that he's a better player than Daniel House? Yeah, I don't think that's far-fetched. His Raptor was an absolute monster, plus 5.9. He's always been a good impact player. But he's not a particularly good fantasy player. I think he can still be pretty solid in moving forward as a rotation guy, and maybe he can drop a top 200 season, but I don't believe that he's going to do too much more than that. Bruno Caboclo, another one of those guys that when he's been given an opportunity like he was for Memphis last season, he really thrived. But knee injuries really ruined his season. He's 25 years of age now. He played just 8 minutes a night. He can block shots. He can hit threes. He can get steals. He can pass a little bit as well. But I think anyone expecting large leaps out of Bruno Caboclo are kidding themselves. I would like to see him get a larger opportunity, and maybe they put him into the rotation somewhat if they don't bring back a Jeff Green. But he is also an unrestricted free agent, Bruno, and I don't think that teams are going to be clamoring over him. And I think any upside for Bruno is probably pretty limited at this point. This back end of the roster is rough, man. Tabo Cephalosha, 392nd ranked player. Who of you even knew that Tabo was on the Rockets? He did play 41 games this season, 2 points per game, shot 38% from the free throw line. There is absolutely no excitement or upside for him. And like so many of these guys, he is an unrestricted free agent heading into this offseason and no guarantee to be retained. Chris Clemens, 401st ranked player. Really bad impact stats, -4 Raptor. He didn't play a huge amount in the NBA though, just the 33 games, 9 minutes, 5 points. But as I touched on earlier, his G League numbers, 24 points with 6 assists and 1.7 steals, making 4 threes per game is impressive. Now, the problem is that he was a sub 40% shooter overall. That's not a great number. His true shooting in the G League was 59 because of the volume of threes, so that's at least encouraging, and he hits his free throws at a strong rate. I just think he's too small to be a regular NBA contributor. It's not going to happen this season. Could it happen down the track? Could he be a 14 point per game, 20 minute a night player somewhere? Yeah, I'm not ruling it out, and that puts him top 200. But there are too many obstacles in Clemens' career to get that high, and number one is his height. He's $1.5 million non-guaranteed for next season. I do think they picked that up, but I'm not putting huge faith in Clemens delivering results. Damari Carroll signed by the Rockets after being waived by the Spurs. He just barely played at all this season. There's a chance that he is washed. He shot 24% from three. Not great in the advanced numbers, and we're not relying upon him at age 34 for any fantasy value. This roster, I'll tell you what, it's bad, man. Tyson Chandler, 447th ranked player. He's 38 years of age. His best role is being the scout team center. If they go back to a center, they're not relying upon him. He has no value as anyone outside of maybe he plays 20 minutes and gets 8 rebounds. Like, that's really what he provides. Can he be better than what he was? Yes, but the dude is almost my age, so there's not all that much excitement to get with him. And who knows if he's even on this roster next season? That's the question for all these guys. Luke Marmute played 3 games for the Rockets, 8 minutes a night. Good to see him get back, but he's never going to get back to the level he was with the Rockets and with the Clippers a few years ago. And even then, he was nowhere near any sort of fantasy asset, and that's not about to change. Now, let's talk about the last couple of guys on this roster, because they're the players that maybe you think have got some upside. Michael Frazier might be the worst player on an NBA roster. He's 27 years of age. Why are we wasting a two-way on him? So you can praise Morey a lot. I just think what he does at the back end of his roster is really bad. And this Frazier pick, I don't really get it. 11 minutes a night in the NBA for Frazier. The minus 14.5 Raptor is horrendous. And then you look at his G League numbers, and he's played 3 years in the G League. His first year in the G League was 2015. He averaged 15 points. He shot 33% from 3. He didn't do much defensively. He didn't do much. 2.4 assists. He's a 6'3 shooting guard who can't shoot. There is no place for him. Sorry, Michael, if you're listening. I just don't think there's any place for him in the NBA. I don't get why he was there. And then the other guy was a player with the most American-sounding name who's actually French, William Howard. 529th ranked player. Started with the Jazz. The Rockets signed him. His Raptor, I didn't even know the scale went this low. Negative 29.6. He didn't make a shot in the NBA. In the G League, he averaged 13 points with 1.6 steals and 5 rebounds and shot 37% from 3. I've got a little bit more hope in Howard than I do with Michael Frazier, and maybe he does belong in the NBA, but I'm not super convinced of it, and I just think there's absolutely really no upside here. Now, Howard is a 6'8 small forward type player who can play some solid defense, and the shooting's not bad, so maybe there is a place for him somewhere in the NBA, but he's already 27. I just don't see what the point of having guys like this at the back end of your roster are. Sure, and I say this, and maybe I would have said the same thing about Joe Ingles when he came across to the Clippers at a similar age and then was able to develop into a star. William Howard is not a sub-star. William Howard is not developing into anything close to that. And really a guy that probably isn't going to be on an NBA roster next season. So for this team where there's so much intrigue at the top with Harden and Westbrook and Covington, it's just super, super boring after that, because this rest of this back end of this roster is just old as shit. And even the young players are old as shit. The youngest player on this roster is Chris Clemens at 23. Their rebuild is already handcuffed because they don't have first-round picks. They don't have Morey to come in there and try and finagle deals to get these selections back. Who knows what's going to happen? They are going to be in for a world of hurt in 4 or 5 years' time. Things can change a lot in that time period, but it is going to be rough. There's nothing to bank on here. I think they'll still make the playoffs next year unless they really blow it up, but it is not looking great for Houston at this stage. Guys, subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. Give me a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, tell your friends, share it, Insta, Facebook, all those places. Go check it out in all those areas. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.